Think not that I have come to destroy the law. We're familiar with this verse, but for some reason it seems to be translated quite differently in the minds of the people who read it than maybe what we would look at it as. Because we get a lot of people who will explain that this means the law's been done away with. Well, this section of the seminar, we're going to be talking about changing your diet from milk to meat. All of us have grown up. We started out as children. We all have begun to learn the exact same way. Our learning process follows a designed pattern which our brain accepts. And so going through the process actually enables us to develop and mature in a intellectual way without causing a lot of cognitive dissonance or brain confusion. So that process is natural and normal, and we've done it in everything we've learned in. We've gone to different levels of understanding in everything we've learned. We may understand physics if you're into physics. We may understand physics very well, but we may not have established much on anatomy or some other form of science. We may not have studied science at all, and we may be a great mathematician. But in everything, we've gone through training and through school to enable us to grow and mature in all the things that we've studied. Well, guess what? It's not just that way in science and math and English. There is this process that we go through in every discipline that we study. And most of you people here are Bible students in one way or another. You may not have gone to a formal education to study the Bible, but you have studied it, you have come to conclusions. And those conclusions are based on what you have read and the degree of abstract thought that you use in interpreting the Scripture. I know it's strange to think about abstract thought. What's abstract and what's concrete? Well, as we mature, we go from being less concrete to more abstract in our thinking. Let me give you an example. When my daughter was about 5 or 6, we were driving down the road and she said, I don't see anything. That's kind of a strange opening statement. So I said, you don't see any what? And she says, anything. Okay, we've gotten that far. Well, what are you looking for? And she says, stuff. For sale. And I says, well, what do you mean? She says, well, the sign said lots for sale, and I don't see anything. Well, when you're 5 or 6 and you see a sign, you take it the way you understand it from what you've been introduced in your family. And so maybe we hadn't talked about parcels of land as being lots. And it was just a realty sign, lots for sale. But she understood it differently. Well, most of you in this room, I doubt very seriously, would be confused by that at all. It would never cross your mind. But that's because you have gotten older, you have matured, and you have gotten to understand that there's more than one meaning to a word, that there's many concepts that may be needed to be dealt with. Now, changing your diet from milk to meat was a case where we're trying to discern a more complex understanding of things. We're trying to be a little bit more mature in our analysis. I really appreciate this quote. It's been attributed to 2 or 3 people. I'll go ahead and attribute it to Roger Bacon at the moment. It says, you cannot by reasoning correct a man of ill opinion, which by reasoning he never acquired. Does that make sense? If you try to reason with somebody but they didn't develop it by reasoning, do you know what will happen? They will react. You will wonder, what on earth just happened? They'll respond in a real negative fashion and be irritated with you. That's because they haven't reasoned through the process. And if you just tried to reason it through with them, well, they begin to become aware that they haven't reasoned through the process. But they aren't really aware, it's just irritating to them. They aren't saying, well, I haven't reasoned through it. They're saying, I don't have a good argument, and I don't know how to answer this person's questions. And so they'll react to you. Well, we want to look at a graph first, and it's going to be how coarse is your food. You know, it says in Corinthians, I fed you with milk and not with solid food, for until now you were unable to receive it. And even now you are still not able. What was Paul talking about here? Who was unable to receive this? Who was it that was having problems understanding things? Well, evidently the Corinthians. And you know, we have Corinthians in the Bible, and we sit there and read Corinthians, and you've got to understand Paul's audience at this time didn't get what he was saying, didn't fully understand what was going on. So, that should cause us a little bit concerned, because how do we know we're understanding what Paul was talking about if his very audience that he was speaking to didn't know what he was talking about? We need to develop in our process and go through the stages in studying Scripture just like we go through the stages in eating food. You know, you first start out with milk. You know, babies don't ask for milk. They just receive it. I mean, their asking is screaming. And that's the best they can communicate at the time. They'll cry. And they'll say, milk. No, they don't say milk, do they? They don't word it at all. You're supposed to know that that's what's wrong. Okay, so many people need teachers to come in and start explaining things to them. Now, theoretically, this should happen when they're just little guys. You know, this should be the elementary stages to it. But there's something that I found really interesting in the Bible studies that I did in church. The stories we got when we were in the first grade were the same stories and readings we had when we were in high school. And most of the explanations weren't too much different. And that should be a little scary. Now you have to understand, after you receive the milk, you're supposed to grow to where you start to be able to eat that ground up, pre-chewed food, so to speak. And we'll just call that mush. You know, we're supposed to be able to start taking mush pretty early on. Maybe at 9 months. Some of you maybe at 6 months start feeding your kids this. You see, we're to wean people off the milk and give them something more. And of course, this develops even further. As they get older, they begin to digest meat. Now, we all understand this, and by the 3 or 4 years old, they're usually eating meat. But you can interfere with the process. You can keep them from ever getting to the mush. You can continue to feed them milk. It's not very nourishing, is it? It is at first. But when they're 3 or 4 years old, I doubt very seriously that they will sustain themselves very well on that. So it has to continue to develop. Well, let's think about how complex we analyze everything we read. You know, when you are reading it as a doctor, let's say you are a doctor of medicine, and you start reading about particular diseases and things like that, there's a lot of complexity that goes into that. You are checking to see the history of the disease. You're trying to see who is susceptible and maybe how it's transferred. You know, we have the Ebola thing going on right now. And so with Ebola, they say, well, this is only transferred through body fluids. It's not transferred through the air. You don't have to worry about being around them. You have to worry about them sneezing on you or something, but you don't have to worry about being around them. That's a good piece of news. In fact, they actually say Ebola should be fairly easily contained because of that. It doesn't seem to be right now in Africa, does it? It seems to be transferring very easily. But that's because people aren't taking precautions. And when you've studied it on a more technical level, you can understand that there's certain precautions you take. I have not studied most of the things in medicine on that level. I haven't seen medicines go through trials. I haven't seen things like that happen too much. I have a cousin that has. And so when we sit down and talk about medicine, he can go right over the head very quick, you know? Okay, that's the way we are on many different subjects. So we all have to start, and what I want to do is develop a graph here that shows you how we start progressing and how we develop in our abilities to understand each discipline that we get into. Our first learning level is on the subconscious level. Now, subconscious means that we're accepting it from the environment around us. We're just learning from what goes on around us. When we're children, nobody teaches us how to talk when we're babies. They don't teach us how to talk. We just start talking because we're imitating what's going on around us. And at first, sentences don't make any sense. Syllables will be run together, and they may not have any meaning to them at all. But at first, the child thinks that talking is just going, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and we've heard them do that. Well, that isn't talking. They think it is. But then they hear a little bit more in the environment, and before long they start developing ideas of what words mean. You know, they start going, ma, 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 and suddenly mama reacts. Oh, that's wonderful, you know. Same thing with da, 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 da. At first they're probably just natural syllables that they're saying. But then that develops because they get to see responses. This is all subconscious. Nobody's teaching them how to do this. Walking is the same way. You don't get out and tell them, okay, now flex this muscle, step forward with this leg. If you do, kid's not understanding it. You can do that all you want. Jeremiah, my son, decided he was going to teach Aaliyah how to talk when she was born. He was about 3 years old. He says, Daddy, I'm going to teach Aaliyah how to talk. Okay. Well, she's a newborn. So what does he do? He walks over there. Say Jeremiah. Say Jeremiah. She didn't say Jeremiah. She just laid there. 2 years later, he had success. She said, Jeremiah. And he thought he'd won the battle. And he went around teaching everybody, I taught the baby how to talk. Well, we know better. We know that that didn't happen. But from his perspective, it did. So, the next level above the subconscious is the conscious learning. Now, Jeremiah did not teach Aaliyah how to talk. But in the first grade, people start going to school, and the teachers teach the children. They actually teach them, and the children learn that there's actual answers to the questions. You've got to understand, a young child does not realize that there is truth. I hear people say, children are so truthful. I disagree with that. They aren't truthful. They will tell you what they think they're supposed to tell you. I wish I had known this when I was a young father. I probably could have dealt with things a whole lot easier, not thinking that my kid was lying every time they tried to speak, every time they tried to answer a question. Because what they were doing was trying to give you the answer that they knew you wanted. That's how they're basing things. And so, did you do this? No. Because if they say yes, they're going to get scolded. But they say no. If you believe it, it's okay. But you see, they have to be able to distinguish truth from a lie. And when you start teaching them what that is, they're usually on the conscious level. Well, conscious level has real answers. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Does that remain consistent throughout all of mathematics? Most of mathematics it does. But then it finally gets to calculus, and there becomes some questions as to whether 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's approaching 4. Approaching 4. What in the world does that mean? Well, you see, the more complex analysis that you do, the more you're considering, the more you're taking into effect. In a world where it's imperfect, things just aren't exact, approaching 4 sometimes is a better answer than it's 4. And I know that that's hard for us to comprehend when we're 6 years old learning math. It may even be hard for us to comprehend being 50 years old and not have calculus. You see, that's a part of our training process and how abstractly we observe and understand a situation. If we continually try to answer with the simplistic answer on everything, sooner or later our answers are going to get confused, because we're going to have two situations that we're trying to apply equally and they don't actually work equally together. So, you develop from the conscious level to the technical level of understanding. In the technical level of understanding, we're actually learning why. If you notice on the conscious level of understanding, I put down that we're answering how. You teach children to memorize their multiplication tables. You give them methodology on how to do things, how to come up with the correct answers. But on the technical level, you learn why you are doing those things. Now, mathematics really affords a great example of this, because somewhere in high school they start making you do proofs in your mathematics. And when they make you do proofs, you're going, why in the world do I have to do this? And they're basically saying, just go ahead and do it. And before long, in following through the proofs, they begin to show how you have developed this process. It's a very important thing to learn, because after you get through the proofs and you learn how the process is done, 20 years later you say, now let me see, how did we do that? And a lot of the why comes back, why you were doing this, why you were doing that. And so you can continue to figure out in later years how to do things, because it's more of a complete understanding of the entire scope of what's going on. So, you learn a methodology on the conscious level, but you learn why the methodology works on the technical level. Now, most people think that they are technical on every subject they ever study. You don't realize that there are things that inhibit you from growing along these different levels. And we're going to discuss some of the things that inhibit you from growing. Now, there's also a way that these levels, you first have to learn it in one manner, and then you have to learn it in another in order to progress up the chart. You can't just jump from conscious learning to technical learning. So there's 2 stages of development. We'll split that down. The first stage we're going to call the stage of mapping. Now, most of you know what mapping is when you think of giving directions. You draw a map. Okay, let me give you another idea of mapping, because we do mapping in everything. What about an architect? An architect draws plans to the house. That's mapping. You are laying down the boundaries, the scope of the way things go, and he's trying to present it to people. Actually, what I'm doing today is mapping. I'm drawing out graphs, and I'm showing you, okay, this is how we progress. But just learning how we progress doesn't help us do the thing, does it? There has to be a further understanding that makes it applicable. So that's called a transforming stage, where you learn to transform the information that you have into useful information that you can do. You have to have the mapping before you can do the transforming, correct? I'm giving the mapping today of what we're doing, and hopefully, if you have time to study this or have time to think about it over the years, it won't come immediately, you will begin to use what we're mapping today, and it's going to help you dramatically in dealing with other people, in dealing with teaching other people, in dealing with just sharing your theological view. Because at the moment, the mapping stage is giving you an idea on how someone will understand you. And if you learn how to find out where they are on this chart, then as you talk to them and share what you're doing, that mapping will give you an explanation of what you can expect from them. Have any of you all ever shared with somebody, we keep the feast? And the first thing they say is, why? They actually don't want to know why, folks. You know how a 4-year-old asks why all the time? He doesn't want to know why. He doesn't even know what why is. Okay, and we mistakenly tell him a lot of times and give him long explanations, and he doesn't get it. He's going to ask you why next time. Okay, they're going to ask you why. And if you give them a technical explanation, they are not going to appreciate it. They are going to react to your technical explanation. Well, I've been told you don't have to do this. Okay, now if you happen to say, well, why do you think they told you that? Or explain to me why you don't have to do this. Or explain to me, all you're going to do is set up a very angry person. Very few people can smile and go through that in a calm manner. Because what they're thinking is that you're condemning them. And what's even worse, they have been told that if they don't do everything the way their congregation tells them to do it, they're going to hell. So you are trying to deceive them and send them to hell. It's no wonder they're upset. Okay, see, we actually have to learn a process, because that's not helping you at all to be sent in that category of causing someone to go to hell. You are now demonized. You are now the evil person, and you won't be able to get over it. And when you learn the process of how to go through this, you will be surprised how much easier it is to get the proper response. But you don't teach a 3-year-old how to walk, talk, do that. You've got to have them on a level to where what the information you're giving them can be received. So, I'm going to give you some names here. This is not necessarily something that you want to sit and memorize or whatever, but it's just to kind of give you an idea of the different levels. And these names are going to change when we start looking at other disciplines. I'm just starting out on a general case. I call this primo-osmosian, and the reason I call it primo-osmosian is because in osmosis, the trees don't breathe, do they? They just sit there and absorb from their environment. And that's what a child does. He just absorbs from his environment. Or a baby, an infant. But this progresses to societal osmosian because he begins to absorb from a larger group of people. And in fact, in order for him to have to absorb from a larger group of people is he actually has to understand first that he isn't his mother. You know, when you're born, when you're first born, you assume that mother is you. There's no thing in your mind that's telling you that you're separate from your mother. I mean, after all, mother takes care of all your needs. Must be an extension of you, just like your heart beats and takes care of things inside of you. You know, delivers blood out to your fingertips. He doesn't know that. It's just a part of what he understands at that moment. Mother is me. And when he starts realizing that mother is a different entity than himself, he can start recognizing that there are other people around him. You know, everybody seems to be a part of me when you're 6 weeks old. You have to actually develop and find out that they got a brain too, and they do what they do. And they do it in spite of you. They do it with you. But societal osmosian is like you recognize a group. You recognize that you're part of a group. There's times on the societal level I wonder if the Hebrew Roots movement has ever gotten to that point. Okay, until they can learn to work together for a common goal, socially, we haven't developed that far. We certainly haven't got to where we can learn how to get along. We haven't even recognized that we're a group together. I guess by the time we name a group and we identify with a group, we've gotten there. Even if we disagree with all the other groups that are the same name and the same group. Okay, this develops up to the teachable level. The teachable level is where we start to understand that there's a correct answer. Like I said earlier, your teachers come in and start explaining things to you. You take tests, and you know that there is a right and a wrong answer, and you study for the test. You're on the teachable level when you're there. This develops into the applicable level, where you learn to apply what you have been taught. And then this jumps to the next stage, the Aristotelian level. Now we name this after Aristotle because of the fact that Aristotle was the first one to actually be on this level that you can find in history, where he was the one that developed logic. The reason he developed logic is how can we take what we learn on one subject and apply it to another? And so he's saying, let me see. All cows eat grass. Now, Bossy, she's a cow. Therefore, we can determine since Bossy is a cow, she eats grass. You see, they start out with this maxim, which is a basic understanding of the group that they're talking about, and they apply it to the group. They find something that's in the group and they apply it. This is how we get taxonomy, the study of the levels of animals. You know, you have the mammals and the reptiles and the amphibians. All of these have been grouped in different levels according to their systems. You know, a mammal nurses their young. A mammal gives live birth. A mammal has hair all over their body. Okay, those are the rules of the mammals. But then we have a problem. we have a platypus. You see, a platypus has a bill like a duck. It lays eggs like a duck. It has hair all over its body, not feathers, and it nurses its young. They hatch from an egg, and they nurse it. Okay, that's just not in our categories. Suddenly we have this conundrum. Now, on the Aristotelian level, you know what they called a platypus? It's a monster! You know, when they first brought the platypus from Australia, I think it was Captain Cook was the one that was telling people about the platypus on his first trip to Australia. And he comes back, and they're going, nah, he's lying. It's one of those sailor stories, you know? And it would seem like this really, really big, silly story. Okay, that wasn't the case. It really existed. And you know, when Captain Cook brought the platypus on his second voyage back in a jar, the doctors and scientists all studied that platypus for months, trying to figure out how those aborigines had sewed it together, because they knew that there was no such creature like this. Okay, on the Aristotelian level, you have everything categorized and defined so precisely that you might not be able to deal with a lot of things. And the things that you cannot deal with become miracles and monsters. See, if it's really bad, it's a monster. If it's really great, it's a miracle. So, we have a problem. Monsters and miracles. Do monsters and miracles really exist? Maybe. I know that probably makes you nervous when I say maybe to miracles. But what we're saying is there an explanation that can be given? And there is an explanation when you look at it from a bigger standpoint. Now, you progress from the Aristotelian level to the Galilean level. The Galilean level, and it's named after Galileo, when you get to this level, you start realizing that you've got to look at things more in sets, in groups, and looking at the bigger picture. Now let me explain to you by something that we observe every day, where Aristotle would have explained it one way and it would have worked, and Galileo would have explained it another way. Now maybe we don't see it every day, but most of us have seen archery before, where someone will take out an arrow and they will shoot it into the air, and it will drop to the ground sooner or later, won't it? Well, you see, Aristotle would have explained it in such a way and calculated it, and it would have worked mathematically, that if you put so much weight of the bow and you let go of the arrow, and the arrow weighs so much, it's going to travel so far, and then it's going to drop to the ground. And so he shoots the arrow, he measures the distance, and he finds out that it goes so far and stops. And he goes back again and he gets another bow and he changes the poundage and he shoots another arrow and he measures the distance and he sees where it drops. Now he can calculate that out, and he can do a very precise calculation and be right almost every time, within just fractions. But where's the problem? The arrow does not go straight, run out of steam, and fall to the ground. Now, almost any archer of his day would have been able to say, that doesn't work. But his calculation proved he was right. But the archer would say, no, if we have the wind blowing this way, we have to shoot at the target that way. if we want to hit that right there, we have to aim up a little bit so that it'll curve and go down. And they recognize this, but they didn't know it. They had just discovered what worked, and they were able to repeat what worked. They couldn't have calculated it by writing down on paper and doing a mathematical equation. And you see, they understood it on the conscious level. They came to the right answer,